Hello, everyone. Welcome to this month's installment of Certifieds to Catch a Fraudster webinar series. Could not be more thankful for you attending this and the other installments of this series. As we kind of kick off a new year, there's been a lot of just changes and developments in the cyber and fraud landscape, particularly those relating to real estate, business email compromise. And now we're going to talk about some new concepts, account takeover, invoice fraud, things like that. And, you know, what's been interesting over the past few years is that consumer awareness has really caught up with industry events and industry experiences. And what I mean by that is for those of you that are serving a customer in real estate, you're a real estate broker or agent, you're a mortgage lender, you're an attorney, you're a title company, you just have to assume going into this year that the consumer is aware that there's risk associated in a real estate transaction that they may not have had that awareness of in the past. And we're gonna build upon that. We're gonna build upon that assumption this year to take you even further into a landscape where you're able to not only speak to the threats, you're able to work through those within your teams, within your referral partners, and really empowering your referral partners to share that education down to the consumer level. So as with any installment, we're trying to bring you our fresh perspective. We have a very, very unique lens at Certified in how we can see early and almost like advanced iterations of fraud threats that will scale throughout the industry. So today we're going to talk about the top 5 that we're most concerned about as a team. I have my good friend, Nate Stephens, with me. He also runs our fraud recovery services team. Nate, thanks for joining. Again, I'll let you do a little intro on kind of the seat that you sit in the org and supporting people across the country as they, in a lot of ways, are experiencing their worst day through a fraud event. So, Nate, welcome. I'll give you the floor here.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Looking forward to this. You know, we started off last year with some fraud recovery services, information, statistics, and insights to kind of kick off the year and share those from what we're seeing year over year. And you know, as Tom mentioned, we do have a bit of a kind of superpower / crystal ball in a way where we are seeing the live real-time impact of fraud in the real estate industry. So for those that are not aware of Certified's fraud recovery services, that's likely a good thing. If you've talked with me, you've gone through one of these experiences and hopefully come out of it better. But our fraud recovery services recovers funds and supports victims of wire fraud. Namely in real estate, we support home buyers, title companies, law firms, settlement companies, anybody who has transferred funds to a fraudulent account. Our partnership with federal law enforcement, financial institutions, and other folks rapidly supports victims with things like account freezing, information sharing, and ultimately recovery of those funds to the tune of about $120 million now over the past 4 years. So impact's large, insights are hopefully helpful for you all, but as always, looking forward to sharing some of that information with you.
And that's money returned back to victims, right, Nate? That's not the addressable loss. The addressable loss is what, hundreds and hundreds of millions, right?
Massive. Yep. We do what we can, but ultimately, as y'all are keenly aware, it's a challenging environment to recover funds. But again, we do what we can to support those folks when they need the help.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I can't thank you enough, Nate, and the team that you lead for doing this work. You know, absolutely amazing. So, all right, we got some ground to cover. Let's dive into it. What's been interesting, if you look at the FBI's IC3 report, that's the Internet Crime Complaint Center report over the last couple of years, the instances or the number of losses in real estate has actually declined, but the amount of aggregate loss continues to increase. So what they're doing, and I think that's shaped by a couple things. We have been in a down cycle in real estate since the Federal Reserve increased rates radically in the fall of 2022. So you had all of 23, all of 24, all of 25, and we kind of still in that state in 2026. That didn't stop them. That didn't lift them off of real estate to go into different categories. They just got better at their craft. But what it did in the industry is they took advantage of the shift to more cash buyers or larger down payments. So as interest rates went up, inventory was still tight. A lot of markets, in our market, I'm a large title agency owner here in Michigan as well. And, we're running about 25% all cash. And they take advantage of those. And they take advantage of the higher payoffs and mortgage balances that people are carrying on that debt. So if you kind of look at it by the numbers, I'll just show some quick numbers and some interesting stats. You can see here that, we had 2021, they kind of ran away with it. This was after the unemployment and the PPP money ran out during COVID. Sorry to rip that wound open. Then they got to work on a more intentional basis through 2023 and 24, even though unit volume actually went down. If we extrapolate that on just a 14% year over year compounding, you can see here that we're essentially going to more than double just in a handful of years, and it's going to go quick. This is not it's not an industry and it's not a force, unfortunately, that is going away. If anything, and we'll profile this more in one of our other TCAFs down the road, it's the highest level of organized syndicated crime I think that the world has ever seen. I mean, cartel level crime. And they're investing hundreds of millions of dollars in the infrastructure, in the housing, in the connectivity, in the networking to do this end to end in all countries. So, and then you can see now that kind of AI being a more efficient layer. I was reading the article in one of the title publications this morning about how AI and kind of mini models are going to be the future of the title industry. They're looking at the same thing. And this recent report from MIT said, hey, on incident tracking, like where are they using these new tools? And you can see here the deep fake video generation and kind of use is kind of an outsized model right now that they're deploying for these scams. You can see here that that's exponential growth starting in 23, going into 25. So what faces our industry on this graph is the deep red. That's the deep fake video. And we're going to have fun showing you kind of a face swap that our CEO Tyler did as a way of just kind of DIY like fraud kits that you can use, and you don't have to be a programmer anymore. This is simply just fire up your computer, put some filters in place, and you can start impersonating somebody. And then the voice generation. So that's kind of the deeper orange there at the top. Those two we're starting to see either impersonating somebody signing a document on a RON, that would be a deep fake video, or placing like a well-timed voicemail directly into somebody's direct dial, impersonating a trusted party to then look at an email and then act upon fraudulent wiring instructions. I think you just have to know that no matter where you're sitting from a location standpoint, no matter the size of your organization or your team, no matter the customer profile, no matter the property types, none of this is going to be random. It's all going to be orchestrated, and it's all going to land at some point on the feet of your organization or that of your customer or referral partner. So what we're here today to talk about is like, let's look at those 5 trends, and then how do we think about preparedness or readiness when it does? And I think we just have to assume that it will. Very coordinated, very time sensitive. And why will title companies continue to be a target? We talked about this in earlier webinars. We are kind of that system of record, right? Alta's campaign about, fraud is too expensive. Fraud is unaffordable. And the narrative that says, yes, we obviously insure and protect property rights and the marketable title transferring between parties, seller to buyer. but it's now grown into protecting the wealth of most Americans. Depending on the study you look at, the equity sitting in someone's home represents somewhere between 40 and 50% of all household wealth that's generated. And when that gets unlocked or that gets transferred between parcel number and addresses as properties are bought and sold, we as the intermediary in the title industry are not only the custodian, but we're the guardian of those funds now. There are complex workflows. There's so many hands in the pie. We're still heavily and outsized reliance on email, documents, timing. Every month kind of has a natural flow, and then just the largest sum of money moving in most people's lives. So know that, and I'll say this as a title company owner, this is hard. This risk continues year over year to become more concerning and harder to manage. And I could tell you, speaking from experience, obviously not only are we just ruthlessly committed to everything that we've developed that's certified from a workflow perspective, but so many other layers of technology to protect the entire organization and communication layers that we have. And it is hard, and it will continue to be hard. But it's not as hard as going through the process that Nate and his team deal with every single day. So I want to, because I'm a wire fraud victim, that's how Certified was ultimately formed. Was Sun Title lost $180,000 back in 2015 that cast us on this journey. And we continue to stay as focused and as mildly paranoid as we were post-incident back then on the issue of just making sure everything is safe. So here are the 5 fraud trends. Nate, I'm going to hand this over to you when we kick off mortgage payoff fraud. Mortgage payoff fraud continues to be the greatest fraud profile, holding the largest addressable risk that we've seen in the industry, even to today. And with Certified and Payoff Protect in a proper procedure, this just should not be a fraud that people are falling victim to anymore. And we're seeing it almost every day, unfortunately. We're going to talk about impersonation fraud, EAT or account takeover. This thing has me up at night. We're going to dive into what happens if a fraudster gains access to a token or an MFA code from your disbursement team or escrow team, or your controller has access to the escrow account and drains it in a matter of hours. And we're going to talk through some of those with Nate and his team. Compromised communication channels. I'm going to give you some examples just of this morning and then like a week and a half ago. Some very interesting things that we've uncovered in our workflow. And then incident response failures, meaning something happened and now I'm learning as I go. And incident response should not be a learning moment. It should be an execution moment when you have a well-developed plan and know what to do. All right, let's jump into it. Nate, anything else you want to lay over that? Otherwise, we're going to pick these things apart.
The part that stuck with me as we walk through the stats and kind of the exposure that title companies face is your use of the word guardian. We've spoken with a lot of victims in the last 5 years, and we've given a lot of these presentations. And what consistently is echoed across, especially business owners, right? Title companies, law firms, settlement firms, is that nobody got into title to be a cybersecurity expert, right? And we continue to hear that, yet it's shifting. And that now is a responsibility of a title company owner, right? And as you mentioned, consumers are becoming more aware of fraud. The public in general is becoming more aware of fraud. And I think, we've talked about this over the years, right? That precedent for onus is shifting as well. And if you're not caught up and actively working to stay ahead of this threat, you're going to find yourself trailing behind. And what that's going to look like is trailing behind a legal precedent and a general standard of care. And if you are not ahead of that, you're going to feel even greater pain than you would even in a loss. So that shift is something that, again, stuck with me through kind of your conversation early, but that guardianship of the funds is even greater than just being a custodian. And that's something that everybody here should truly understand. It is becoming your responsibility, whether or not you're transferring those funds, whether or not those funds are coming in or out of your escrow account. You have to guard that transaction, or you may find yourself liable.
I think that's exactly right. That liability is playing out in the courts, and spoiler alert, we'll be dropping something to emphasize what that means through our state of or suit for wire fraud later this year. But also, I think you're right, Nate, in the sense that like everybody expects the title commitment to be accurate and timely, and the closing statement to be accurate, the closing to go well with keys and possession and funds transferring on time. But this thing in the background that looms around the safeguarding of what is an exponential amount of funds based off of revenue for the average title agent is hard, and it will continue to be. I always use the phrase you're going to take a pill, but you get to decide if you're going to take an aspirin or a vitamin. But you will be swallowing a pill, and it's easier, in my opinion. It takes more discipline, it takes more intention for vitamins than it does kind of the aspirin. So mortgage payoff fraud, mortgage payoffs, we looked at our pipeline. If you haven't done this, I recommend that you do this. If you're in the title space, closing attorney, escrow company, go back on your files from last year, the last 6 months, and see how many mortgage payoff statements that you originally requested had to be updated before close, where you blew through or were bumping up against the good through date. For us, it was about 50% because we get them early. We like to socialize the numbers. The prorations as things change are easy to update. But they know that, right? So whether it's, hey, 10%, 50%, 20%, it doesn't matter. But there's a lot of updates. And the lender impersonation and compromised service channels, changing bank information, they use all of these things. And in most cases, even though it's like, oh, I call in and they fax it to me, guys, they fax it to an email server. So ultimately, the thing is ending up in an email as a PDF. And there's just a time pressure component to it. I think the other thing that's not listed here that I do believe is just check your process and procedure and make sure this concept of inherent trust doesn't override the procedure or the need to call before a payoff is made or using Payoff Protect by Certified. And what I mean by that is if, let's say, John put the initial payoff in the title production software and, Sue has to give an update, and then the update comes in, but it's actually, Matt that's doing the disbursement after. Like, we just have to make sure that there's no assumptive trust, regardless of who may have placed the payoff into the TPS. So, Nate, here's an example recently. You see this all the time. Walk us through, I guess, what you've seen over the last couple of years in the sophistication and timing of mortgage payoffs, and then where things break down. Like, why are people still falling victims to this scam?
Yeah. I think one of the things that everybody needs to be aware of is that this document is going to leave your system, your house, right? Other folks in the transaction, like several of the documents, but namely the payoff statement, will leave your system, right? So there is exposure that you cannot control to a fraud actor gaining access to this document, this information that they can then nefariously use against you, right? So just know that in the back of your head and think about that through your workflows of what documents, what key information, right? Buyer contact information, for instance, is another one. That how can you protect those pieces of information from leaving your system, right? Or when they leave and come back, how can you re-vet those, right? And that's something that we see often with payoffs, is that you may not have compromised this document. However, you're responsible for dispersing those funds. And that vector is going to come back at you if somebody else has access and ultimately leaks this information. What we're seeing in payoffs these days, honestly, has not changed much from what we saw 2 years ago when payoff fraud was kind of the hot ticket item in real estate fraud transfers. This is the same vector. And we talk about it often. I'll say it fairly certainty. This fraud vector should be closed, right? There are tools, there are processes, but ultimately there are tools that should and will eliminate mortgage payoff fraud. Okay, so what that means is that the continued volume of mortgage payoff fraud that we're seeing, and Tom mentioned it, right? We see this every day. We're still seeing payoff fraud 2 years after it was a hot ticket item, is a breakdown in process and procedure, right? And those processes and those procedures, you have to understand, no matter how often you've looked at them and buttoned them up and closed holes that you think could expose you to a loss, process and procedure is only as good as the people following them. And these fraud actors know that. And so they're not trying to technically break down your systems, technically break down your workflows. It's simple social engineering, right? And so I think that's just a key way we have to think about a lot of the real estate fraud that we see and that you all are facing, but specifically mortgage payoff fraud. You have to understand that you have to take the human element out of this workflow, and those tools exist. So what we're seeing in mortgage payoff fraud, again, the threat vector is similar. I was blown away by that stat in your own systems that 50% of the payoffs you're receiving need updates, right? That is the key time or kind of the key vector that folks see, right? Hey, here's an updated statement, because that's a natural part of the process. But the part that troubles me is that when a payoff fraud exists in a title company or law firm system, we often see multiple frauds. Okay, so this is one that not only is likely one of the larger, if not the largest transactions on a file, we often see that multiply across multiple files, right? Just the way that payoff fraud works. So that's something I think y'all should be aware of. If you are impacted by payoff fraud or have a fear that you've received a document, you have to audit everything. And again, that's one of the most damaging aspects of this fraud, is that I would put it over 50% of the frauds that we take on the mortgage payoff side, have a subsequent fraud that may not appear right away, right? One of the other challenges of payoff frauds is this is not a transfer that somebody is going to notify you that they've received, right? Seller proceeds, they're itching to get it. They're going to tell you day after day of if they don't receive that wire transfer. This one will sit there for a month, right? Until somebody's loan defaults and they're getting messages from their lender, and then they reach out to you and it takes a week to identify, where are these funds? And people are communicating, and that amount of time that passes extremely challenges recovery. So that's kind of what we're seeing, Tom. And again, this should not exist. There are tools to prevent this, but ultimately what we're seeing and why it continues to be pervasive in the industry is just a breakdown of process and procedure.
The thing I would say against that as well, Nate, is that, we've been in a lull from a transaction activity standpoint, with everything that we're seeing with rates likely to continue to kind of go down over the next 24 months. We're going to see more and more payoff requests through refinances, more purchase money activity where we're just going to be processing more payoffs. So all said, now's the time, right? Now's the time, like Nate said, grab the tools, reach out to Certified. Shameless plug here. We don't make a move without using the payoff tools. Not at all. And you just can't manage this risk without one of those tools. And then the fallback is an incredibly well documented double trigger on callback, right? All right, borrower and seller impersonation. So I would say 2 years ago, we were starting to see, actually 3 years ago, it started in the Naples area. There was a German crime syndicate that tested early days of what we believe were seller impersonation. Remember that, Nate? That was, we got some signals from our law enforcement partners, and then it died down and it came back in just an absolute tsunami, if you will. Now it's both borrower and seller impersonation. So our federal law enforcement partners are being called in more and more when the homeowner that's sitting on a bunch of equity is being impersonated to do a cash out refinance. And you guys know That's typically loan officer not meeting the client ever, not showing up to closing, mail away closing. So it's both. The tools available for open source identity and facial scraping are there, and they don't need computer programming to do it. And vacant land, non-owner unoccupied, or homes, like I say, that have either no or very little mortgage balance associated with it are going to be top targets. And I think the challenge here is that we're not used to that. We're thinking, hey, it's Nate and it's Tom on this webinar, but we'll show you a video in a minute where, well, is it really? In a world where AI can just completely spoof somebody in real time? And I think where we're moving as an industry, I'll just throw a prediction out here, is identity verification is going to be a table stake at the time that a file is opened. So we do that from our organization on all transactions, including refinance, vacant land, non-owner occupied. But I believe we're also kind of building that scaffolding over to say every transaction, every time, we're going to make sure that we're dealing with the parties that we believe we're dealing with. And guess what, guys? That not only protects you, your underwriters, the integrity of your E&O and your cyber policies for the next renewal, but also your referral partners and the buyers and sellers that ultimately are hiring us to do a job. We're working for the buyer and the seller. The conduits there obviously are our referral partners. But before I play this video, Nate, anything to add on to what you're seeing as far as like fraud recovery services because this is like social engineering 2.0. It's not just a really well-crafted email or text message anymore. It's like, okay, you want me to look like Nate? I'll look like Nate. No problem.
Yeah, and I like that you called it social engineering 2.0 because my thoughts here is this is a very complex fraud vector as well as a complex prevention posture that you have to have. There's multiple layers to this, right? This is not the same as vet the instructions through a tool. Those are good. Send the money, right? You have humans that you have to verify that you may not have met, that nobody has met, that have just sent to your direction. Right now, it's your responsibility to send the money to them. So I like that you said it that way because this is a challenging fraud to prevent and requires multiple points of identity validation, multiple points of security checks in your workflow in order to prevent it. And the part that makes this so valuable for the fraud actors and easy for them to pull off is that narrative consistency, right? They understand how this works. This is, we're 5 years past a fraud actor not deeply knowing how a real estate transaction operates, the timing, the transfers, the people, all of that. You assume that is the basis for every one of these fraud attacks, but that narrative consistency is also what attacks your team, right? And they are going to see the same names. They're going to see the same reasonings for what these folks want them to change. They're going to see likely the same faces like we're going to show you, right? So that part, again, plays on the human element of fraud. And we'll go back and forth on this, pretty much every time I get on here, I'm going to talk about this, that these frauds are not ultimately deeply technical. They are social engineering, right? And as we showed on that chart earlier, the use of AI, it is social engineering. That is the bulk of the incidents right now and the way that fraud actors are taking advantage of that technology. And that is a threat that you're facing that ultimately leads to these different types of transfer fraud. But it's social engineering at its core. And so it's challenging to prevent. It's a complex fraud on the back end. But that narrative consistency is, I think, what really exposes our teams, your teams, to this fraud vector.
Yeah, we always talked about this idea that, one stranger being a closer meets another stranger, a seller or a buyer in a closing room, and a state-issued driver's license that they can easily fake now and nobody can tell the difference is the thing that builds that immutable trust. Mm-hmm. We're beyond that now. And when I say identity verification, I'm talking about certified's match product where we're scanning that ID for credential analysis. We're doing a biometric match. We're looking at all the signals from a geography and other like device authentication standpoint. I mean, that's the type of when you look outside of normal written process and procedure, there is a technology layer that can combat this at scale. I do believe that. But without that, it's just the risk is too high. So, all right, let's have some fun. We're going to play a quick video. My good friend, CEO of Certified, Tyler, played around one morning on what's called face swapping. And this is just the idea of deep fake. If you haven't heard of that term, is where they're using visual and auditory and 3D. It used to be two-dimensional. Now it's three-dimensional. Layers of artificial intelligence to basically just impersonate someone. And so let's play this video real quick.
All right, now we're gonna do some live face swaps. Let's start off with somebody famous. What do you think of me as Adam Sandler? How about The Rock? Oh yeah. Can even be my good buddy Tom Cronkright here. Check this out. One of the craziest parts about this face masking, yeah, the eyes are a little bit weird. They aren't the baby blue Tom Cronkright eyes. But check this out. I have my light on my camera, and my face reacts to the light, which is just insane. And even if I put light, it's not bad. Yeah, this is the age we're living in, folks.
Nate, absolutely terrifying. Like, that it just is like the technology's here, but it just shouldn't exist. You know what I mean? It shouldn't exist, but it's not going away. So I hope you guys, I guess, share the sentiment that we're in trouble if we don't have a way to combat that. All right, let's talk about account takeover, escrow account takeover fraud, otherwise known as ATO. This is another layer, again, of social engineering to steal login credentials for your bank treasury or your bank general account portal or login. There is rapid, complete, and it's a full run out or depletion of the account that we've seen once access is gained. Discovery happens, unfortunately, soon after, but the money's moving quick. So when you think about, we always kind of segment, is this a money mule that's probably a victim themselves that receive money, or is this a pro job, we call it internally? These are pro jobs, guys. They get access to your escrow account, and there's several $1 million in it. They're going to run that out before you can detect it, unless there are alerts and triggers that your bank has. It plays into, the fear of fraud. So what the solicitation is interesting. These are inbound phone calls, inbound text messages, inbound emails where your bank fraud department or security team will be impersonated, and your escrow officer, your disbursement officer, somebody with control, login level control, is being convinced or socially engineered that something's wrong and they need to log in right now. And oh, by the way, I'm gonna send you a token. Just hit refresh or something on your browser. I'm gonna push you a token. If you can give that to me, I'll be able to look at this in real time with you. So they have the username. They typically have the password because they've scraped that or bought that in the dark web, or they just used a program to guess, and they need that one-time token or that MFA code that's coming from the phone. And dual controls are often missing, where somebody setting up cannot also release, and then it leads to kind of a run out. So, all right, Nate, this has probably been one of the fastest growing vectors hitting fraud recovery services this year. Mm-hmm. And I want to hand it over just to kind of lay this up.
Yeah. We saw our first instance of account takeover fraud in January of 2025. It was new. We'll talk about the challenges to recovery efforts that it faces, or that we face when we're trying to recover these attacks. By the end of the year, this became 10% of the frauds that we're taking on, to the extreme that even underwriters in our space are putting out PSAs, public service announcements, about this fraud vector. And I want to break it down one more time because this is new, right? And this is kind of the foresight, the insights that we talked about at the beginning that we can provide for you all from my team. But this is a new fraud type, right? It is fairly simple. There are ways that they can target you, that they can gain access to this, and we list them out here for you. But at its simplest form, and the majority that we're seeing, is a phone call. And they use a spoofing tool, so it looks like it is your bank's fraud department. We've seen them go as far as on the call, when they call your team and say, hey, there's activity on your account that we believe is fraudulent. Your team may question it. They say, oh, look on the back of your card, right? Look on the website. This is the fraud department's phone number. At that point, they gain trust, right? Okay, yeah, it's in the back of your head when somebody tells you your account's being drained right now. Oh, okay, yeah, this is my bank. Okay, what's next? What's the next step? They then talk to you about transfers, and you can see them on your account. They say, oh, there are 3 transfers, each for $50,000 that we're trying to stop, right? And that's the level of fear social engineering that Tom mentioned, right? They're calling you, telling you that we're trying to stop fraud from occurring on your account and validating that this is your bank through a spoofed phone number, right? So now they've entered in and they've built that trust. Then they begin the work, right? And that's where the true social engineering happens. There's multiple ways that they can do it, but ultimately somebody on your team or yourself will provide your token, your authentication token, your key that allows them that access beyond username and password. And so it is a very challenging fraud to identify and prevent, as well as recover. So the volumes increase drastically. We're likely to put out a PSA here shortly to notify not only the real estate industry, but all of the partners that we work with on the recovery side to let them know this is coming, because this is the number one fraud that you all and the American public honestly are facing going into 2026. What scares me the most about this with regard to real estate, right? We talk a lot about mortgage payoff fraud, buyer cash or close fraud, seller proceeds fraud. This is a fraud vector that is not targeting a regular transfer of funds in real estate, right? So think about that. When you're transferring funds, we've hammered into your heads, you've heard it from everybody in the industry, you're thinking about the transfers that you're making, right? And that's where you are applying your security tools. That's where you're applying certified, right? To protect payoffs, to protect disbursements, right? Everything like that. This is going to blindside, and it has blindsided the title industry because it's not targeting your normal transfers that you are thinking about. That's where we're exposed, is when we're moving money or when we're accepting money. This is completely out of left field, right? And then when they do gain that access, it's a complete dump of the escrow account. We've had some terrible stories coming in last year, one to the tune of 1.7 million dumped from an escrow account. And I think about that as an owner or operator. Not only are you going to try to recover those funds, but the fallout of your responsibility specifically in an escrow account and the balancing of that on a daily basis, right? It is very impactful, let alone the challenges of recovery, right? When we think about recovery aspect related to account takeover frauds, traditionally, right, when you transfer those funds, all of them are going to land in one bank account. We freeze that bank account, we get those funds back to you. The difference here is that when they gain access to your account, they will send out multiple transfers. We've taken on recoveries to the tune of 75 transfers out of one single account, all relatively small, right? $10,000 to $50,000, which then continue to multiply into second banks and break down, right? So you can imagine the challenges for recovery to now try to chase down 75 accounts at 10 different financial institutions, all small transfers that can move beyond quickly, right? So the recovery, it's not only a challenge, I'll say it's near impossible in some of these instances to get these funds back. So that's a lot of information. This is a new fraud type, but again, this is really what I'm scared of going into this year for you all, because it is such a blindside from the traditional fraud vectors and kind of transactions that we think about protecting.
That's why I said earlier, this one has me up at night. This is the take down the whole thing in one afternoon type fraud. Right?
And two things I do want to offer, we're throwing these scary things out, and this is a fraud that is evolving. The prevention, the security that you're going to have around this is evolving, and we'll help message and kind of inform you all what we believe is the best way to protect yourselves against this. But two things that I highly recommend you do today as you think about your accounts and who has access. Number one, work with your bank to set velocity limits on those transfers leaving your account. Okay, now you all are sending a lot of transfers out of your escrow account, but there is a level that you can say, hey, if 100 transactions, if 50 transactions leave my account in 10 minutes, lock it down, right? That is abnormal behavior. And all you have to do is work with your bank to set those limits on your account. Okay, so velocity limits is one step you can take here. The second one, and this is a part of your team, this is a part of your procedure that you're going to have to implement, is the two-person rule. Okay, and the two-person rule is very simple, that two people have to be present, two people have to authorize a significant change. I would go as far as saying anything related to bank account access, to bank account changes, to conversations with your bank. Any conversation with your bank must be vetted by a second person before a change occurs, before somebody logs in, right? Because ultimately, again, that social engineering will work on a singular person. So those are my two kind of recommendations for you. I know we threw a very scary fraud vector at you, but implement velocity limits at a minimum with your bank. Talked about this fraud threat with your bank, as well as just implementing a two-person rule for any sort of interaction with your financial institution or logging into your bank account that is more than just sending a single transfer.
Oh, sage advice there, Nate. Sage advice. And we have those set up on our escrow account as a title company. So that anomalous behavior, that out of the ordinary from normal practice is just enough to pause. All right, the next one is just compromised communication channels. And you might think, Tom, are you talking about compromised emails? Yeah, but we're also seeing more device takeover as well through malware. So you have to go into a transaction with the assumption that somebody's device or somebody's email is going to be compromised. And these bad guys have access, are filtering it, and are just sniffing around for opportunities to approach somebody to divert funds. So one of the scams, I was actually approached, I was telling the guys this morning when we were in staging, about 3 hours ago, I received an email from a real estate agent that appeared to be with a national brand. They were asking me to join a Zoom link, schedule a Zoom call to see if we could help them with their cash purchases here in the state of Michigan. When you break the email down, the domain name was a credit union in Utah, a small credit union, and I couldn't find any licensed individuals in the signature line of who they were sending it. So what were they doing? Well, this is what they're doing for our referral partners. Is a vetted lead comes in through one of these paid lead sources. They want to have an interview with the real estate agent, and they say, hey, can we do it by way of Zoom? They have no intention to join a Zoom. What they're doing is harvesting the email and password that they would normally use, because that's what they're going to put in Zoom. And then they use that to compromise the Gmail or the Outlook or the other whatever email account in other platforms being used, even social media. And then they have access to our referral partners' communication channel by way of email or social media. They're so efficient once they gain access, it's almost undetected. So we had a situation a couple weeks ago, this was wild, never had this before, where, again, we buy layers of security, certified one of those. I can see an email that we're working on a file with one of our good real estate broker clients was opened out of the country. Actually Western Africa. So I call the broker and I say, hey man, I think we have a problem. I'm seeing a mobile device open out of the country. Can you go into your email server logs and see if anybody has opened the email, any of your agent's emails? He said, well, it looks like they tried to over the weekend, but MFA stopped it, blah, blah, blah. I said, okay. I said, let's go down to the device level of the agent. And to fast forward, sure enough, this agent had received a PDF about a week before, opened it, thought it was coming from a friend. It was in like French or something. It was some weird PDF, closed it, didn't think anything of it, but sent an email to this guy to say, why'd you send me something that I couldn't even read? He's like, what are you talking about? I didn't send you anything. Well, that had malware in it. It was instantly installed in the laptop. The antivirus device that he had running at the time wasn't advanced enough to pick it up. So we had him download a more advanced, and actually exposed the malware that took over the entire device. So why am I bringing that up? He's working on a $900,000 cash sale as the transaction coordinator at this moment. So then we're going to talk about incident response, but so what do you do in those cases, right? You got to identify everybody, you go out of band, we got to wrap our arms around this thing all the way to close. But had I not known that, then what, $900,000 cash just goes missing as they approach the closing room? I mean, that's the risk vector. And you could say, well, Tom, how is that your problem? Well, it is our problem, right? That's the standard of care that Nate is thinking about or has described for you, that it's like all our problem, like everything else that we may or may not have done. It's always the title company's fault, right? But when the communication at that level is compromised, the risk profile goes up on both sides, like exponentially.
As you described that, Tom, number one, those are terrifying stories, right? These are evolutions to the entry points that fraudsters are utilizing to target you all in your transactions. If those don't scare you, those don't scare your team, I'd be surprised, right? But I think about the back end of a fraud, right? We're currently working on one right now. There's a brokerage that is related to several fraud transfers. We went through their systems yesterday, and there's no email compromise, right? So think about that, right? Like typically these frauds are occurring because somebody's email is compromised. There is no email compromise. So we have 7 transfers, over $1 million in fraud losses across multiple title companies, and we can't identify the hole that is leaking this information. We can't even point the finger at this group other than the fact that they're involved and or related to the transactions. So if you're liable for $1 million in transfers and you're trying to point a finger, this would be a 6-month investigation period just to try to understand where this is at, if you can even close it. So, right, these levels and these details, as Tom walked through that story, it's just echoing for me on this active fraud that we're working on, of how would you identify and close this loop? How would you point the finger at somebody to say, hey, it's not my fault, it's their fault. I'm not responsible for these funds, because ultimately you're going to be responsible for the disbursement of those funds. And if they don't get to the right place, current precedent is putting onus on you whether or not somebody else was compromised, right? So if you can't even prove that somebody was compromised, how can you recover from this? So right, again, I just wanted to pull on that, because these are fascinating new evolutions to their entry points, very challenging to identify. And then ultimately, if there is an incident, the results and kind of investigative period is going to be extensive, and likely it's cheaper for you to just pay the claim, pay the funds, than try to dig that deep to the level that Tom just described.
Yeah, because I could have stopped there, Nate. And for those of you that, let me explain it a little more clearly. The broker was in the Outlook and could not identify any unauthorized use. He saw some attempts, and then the token, the MFA, thankfully, he's a smart guy, had it turned on. But if they take over the device, they're just controlling the Outlook that has already been logged into as the user. That goes undetected, guys, unless the device, the machine itself, is running antivirus to pick up that third-party control, right? That malicious software that was installed. And we're gonna start to see this, right? And again, had it not been for the signal of the email open out of the country, we never would have known about it. We never would have known about it. Yes, we use certified and we could have identified them, but they would have been approached. They may, I would say they'll likely still be approached, because we have to assume now that they have a copy of the purchase agreement, they know the close date, they saw a prelim closing statement because it was a cash deal, and they're going to be approached, but they're ready. And I think as we fold into the last thing of incident response, guys, again, I'll say it again. Incident response is not a teaching moment. It is an execution moment. It's a moment where all the preparation, all the partners, all the procedures start to run in lockstep to identify, mitigate, and control the risk that now you're exposed to. It also includes a post game of what to do after. We can always do better. These iterations that Nate and I are describing, I hope you're leaving this saying, hey, this is just an evolution. We're just fighting against somebody else's playbook that continues to evolve, and that is true. Alta has an amazing incident response plan template. I happen to be on the subcommittee that helped put this together, so I'm a little bit biased, but it provides a roadmap. Your insurance company, your cyber carrier, you can go online, use AI, right? Load something up and say, here's who I am, and I'm concerned about these threats. And these are the threats that we just talked about, and others. But put in the work here. Like, you need the calorie burn on this one early so that if something does happen and you find your way to Nate or you find your way to your insurance carrier or your underwriter, you're in the best position to minimize or avoid that loss.
And Tom, when it comes to those IRPs, I think what folks need to understand, and unfortunately I have a lot of these conversations post-incident, right? It's very easy to think about the financial impact of a fraud, right? I am out X dollars, I need to find X dollars or figure out how to fund this transfer. That is 20% of what your IRP should be, walking you through, the steps that should be included, the people that should be included. The non-financial impact of a fraud incident, again, immediately might not feel important, but is going to be substantially more work, more communication, more players involved that you're going to have to navigate. And without experience, I'm often sending folks to Tom saying, hey, I'll help you recover the money. But listen, there's going to be a lot more that comes out of this with your cyber insurance, with your underwriter, with everybody else involved, that you need to understand that your incident response is not just try to get the funds back. It is much, much more than that, let alone the recovery aspect of that in terms of resecuring your systems, kind of the debrief post-incident. So I just want everybody to understand that, again, it's very easy, and I'm often dealing with those conversations of, hey, the monetary loss is the hot topic, and it is. I don't want to understate that is extremely important. But as an operator, as an owner, there will be non-financial impact from this that may feel heavier once that funds transfer kind of moves on and we move beyond the financial loss.
Yeah, you almost have an instant toll that you pay because that's the loss amount, but then there's this long tail kind of tax that the organization is going to pay. And that's assuming that it doesn't get out and the reputational harm isn't something that you can't even walk back from, right? But to tune into what Nate said earlier, like payoff fraud, if you're hit once with a fraud, you just have to assume there's other loss lurking in the pipeline that you're not aware of, or they're going to come back soon because they're very smart. If they see a hole in the security fabric or the attack surface that they can penetrate, they'll just run a truck through it. So I think we talked about this, like where are the components of where companies fall flat, not investing in the technology and the early insights. Guys, you should have a tech stack so advanced that you're playing offensive, not defensive. The idea that we could identify through an email open out of country leads to within an hour a device that's completely taken over by malware, that's offensive security posture. That's where you want to be. It doesn't happen overnight. The fact that we can validate and identify, we use Certified to hard stop a seller impersonation fraud from a trusted party that came inbound before Thanksgiving. Again, out of country open, right? Incident response plan that's not fully baked. So you have it, you put it in the circular file. It's one of those things where you hope to never, but you're not actively engaging, and you can have third parties help you through this process. Like you have to role rehearse this. And just assumptions that everybody's going to follow the procedure. I used to think as an owner, I don't anymore, check life at the door. You're now an escrow officer today. You're a disbursement officer today. You're not checking life at the door. If they have a hard time or they're going through something, that again is just, they're going to fall victim more systematically, or they're going to be more vulnerable. So that,
and Tom, I want to
Yeah.
I want to roll this back just to the first point there in that tech stack. And I want to ask you a question because I can understand the pushback that some folks have on, a multitude of security tools, and that's financial, right? These are not cheap, right? And you have to have multiple different vendors, multiple different tools in order to protect yourself against everything, right? So in your organization, kind of just talk us through that financial blocker, right? Because again, it's dollars, right? It's dollars that I think often are preventing people from moving forward. We're in a down market for the third or fourth year in a row, so transactions are low. How do you not only justify that spend? I think obviously from your position, it's going to be justified, but yeah, how do you justify? How do you reframe, whether it's to your board, internal teams, that spend on something that may or may not be used, but ultimately you need to have? Because I really do like the framing of offensive security posture, but that comes at a cost.
Great question, Nate, and I wish the entire industry would adopt what I'm about to summarize. There are things in this business that you can control, and there are things in this business as a title agent that you can't control. When I look at insurance, I'm a check every box, pay the premium guy. Every time. Going through a cyber renewal right now. How do we get higher limits? How do I get more? Because I've been through this, right? So when you go through a wire fraud and you realize the level of vulnerability and the asymmetric risk that we have in the title space that you can't fully insure, you need everything around you to put you in the best possible position to either prevent or mitigate or backfill a loss when it occurs. It's not an if. I look at technology the same way to say, look, I can't control how good these fraudsters are going to be. It's out of my control. I can't control the level of investment that these enslavement camps that are continuing to be built in some of these regions across the world. I can't control the head count. I can't control their focus on real estate. What I can do is put me, just like insurance, in the best possible position that we don't have an incident. And the things that I can control is what I focus on. Look, man, that's just a sunk cost. That's a cost of doing business. And if you don't like the business, then get out of the business. Don't subject your customers and your employees to a higher level of risk because you don't identify that you have to make the investment to stay current with what we're talking about today. Just talking straight as a title owner. So these risks are not, you think of a title commitment. Requirements, they're not requestimates. These are requirements to do business and survive on a long game basis in this industry. What can I control? A brand strategy that says Sun Title is the safest company, one of them in the country, to do business with. We invest in layers of security, right? We go out and part of our brand and part of our internal culture is the safety and soundness that we bring to information, to identity, to funds transfers, to all of those things. That's what I can control. And I think when you realize it's just so black and white, Certified's only one layer that we pay for in our agency among 20 layers of security to protect everything, likely a stack of 20 layers. And it takes that. So I hope I'm answering your question. It's one of those where you just have to acknowledge that this is a required investment, pivot to what you can control, lead with a security posture, and go win in market against it. Because your competitor is going to go through something. They just will. And you may go through something. We went through something. I just explained the three somethings in the last 60 days. All of them were prevented because of these layers. So great question, man. Know that fraudsters will continue to evolve, this readiness that we talked about. So here's what we believe. And then Nate, I'll run through these real quick and then, and you can voice over as well, that you just have to assume that your referral partner is compromised. Somebody has access to the communication channels that are being used. You're going to be, or a trusted party is going to be spoofed in a transaction. And it's a matter now of the readiness and the empowerment that you have internally and externally to identify trusted communication or solicitations from those that are not trusted. The continuous verification, this mild state of like paranoia, I call it, just to give your people the time and the space and the education and empowerment to mitigate this thing down. As Nate mentioned, I think very elegantly, this is a non-technical fraud that we're going to continue to fight, and that's what makes it the hardest. That's why you can't pin it down on an email layer of security that pops an IP address and just doesn't deliver it to your employee. It's just not that simple, right? It's much more complicated. Best practices, lean into Alta best practices, because if you don't, and there's an issue, that's Exhibit A to the plaintiff's complaint. This is just Exhibit A, guys. So go through it. There's a ton of best practices, all the pillars. Lean into SOC compliance from a data security and network security perspective. Really look at your controls and your standing operating procedure. And please, please, please have a meaningful and an effective incident response. Those are the table stakes. So Nate, what did I miss?
Nothing. And you know, I think if you're still on with us now and still watching the webinar, right, you may understand this more than others. We mentioned it earlier, right? Y'all didn't get into this space to become cybersecurity experts, but it's becoming a responsibility. And we've talked a lot about, you know, tech stacks, IRPs, adjusting processes, communication internally, externally. This is a lot of work, right? I'm not a business owner in the title and escrow space. I don't know what this looks like. I'm making recommendations to you all that, again, I understand carry a lot more weight and are maybe more complex and may not even involve your own business or your own, folks working in the operation, and might take steps that require other people's authorization on taking those steps. And so I want to not understate that we understand a lot of what we're talking about is heavy, right? And may take a lot more work than we're kind of showing it right here at the surface level. And it's not something that is, traditionally or actively your responsibility. But the transfer of funds is, and the transfer of that generational wealth is, right? So those two things are no longer separate. They come hand in hand at this point. So just want to make that mention, right? We're here to help you. You can have my contact information. We'll send it around. Tom's always available to speak with you on these steps and taking these steps. But appreciate y'all listening today. Hopefully you found some insights in this, and looking forward to sharing more stories and insights in the future.
Great points, Nate. Here's a QR code just quickly if you want to get in contact with us directly. If you want to put something in the comments on YouTube that, hey, let's do a webinar on a meaningful tech stack, I'd be happy to. It's been an iteration over a number of years to get to the point where we are as a title agent. And, I just have the blessing and really the privilege to continue to help lead Certified through what it's doing from a product, a messaging, and a security perspective. But we're with you guys, and we hope nothing but a safe and secure year again this year. So with that, I'll sign off and tune in. We'll have some more great content on next month's To Catch Your Fraudster. Until then, Nate, thank you so much, man. I love connecting, and just your insights and your wisdom from the seat you're in is just incredible. It really is. It's truly remarkable. So, all right, guys, with that, we'll sign off. Take care.